Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Current Consulting Group and sponsored by GAZE. I'm Jessica Polk of the Current Consulting Group, and I'll be conducting today's webinar presentation entitled Method Matters, Traditional Drug Testing versus Identification of Impairment and How They Differ. We'd like to again recognize that today's presentation has pre-qualified for continuing education from HRCI and from SHRM for those who attend the entire 1 hour presentation. If you want those credits and you qualify for those credits, then we will send you an email after the event with the IDs that you need for that certification. We'd like to again thank our sponsor today, GAZE. You'll hear a little bit more about GAZE and their product offering later in our presentation. Our presenters today are Brian Feely, who's the Senior Vice President at Current Consulting Group, and also Ken Fickler, who is the CEO and founder of GAZE. Brian is the Senior Vice President at Current Consulting Group and has more than 40 years of experience in the diagnostic industry. He is a named inventor on 4 patents in the diagnostic field and is an author of numerous publications. And Ken is as I mentioned before, the CEO and founder of GAZE. GAZE is a first of its kind real-time impairment detection platform that analyzes eye movement changes using artificial intelligence to discover impairment from cannabis and from other drugs. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and turn the virtual microphone over to Brian first to get us moving. And I'm going to go ahead and mute my line so we can hear Brian nice and clear.
Okay, very good. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar today. Look forward to discussing this topic. I think it's really relevant given today's world of changing laws and legalization of marijuana and terms such as impairment becoming more and more integrated into substance abuse testing language and programs across the US. It's a pleasure to be presenting today with Ken Fickler from GAZE. Ken and I have gotten to know each other pretty well over the last couple of years, and you know, as a former lab rat myself who spent some time developing products and technology in the laboratory, I'm always excited when there's new tests and new concepts out there that help people with you know, different ways of looking at not just substance use and you know, kind of the typical things that we think about when we're dealing with drug testing, but also just standard fitness of duty, things that sometimes are not necessarily related to one's use of a substance, just, you know, other types of behavioral and environmental issues that go on. And the GAZE product, I think, is really exciting. It's slick, it's effective, it's a quick test to do. I had the pleasure of trying it myself last year at one of the conferences that we were at. And you know, it's, as you'll hear more about it in a few minutes, it's a system that's able to take measurements using eye movement that is very much in line with DRE, drug recognition expert type testing that occurs, for example, at a roadside if you were to be have been pulled over and had the displeasure of such a test. This is able to do that based on a headgear design, which is slick and comfortable to wear. So I look forward to bringing Ken on here in a second. Our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the concerns in the workplace as it relates to substance abuse and substance use in the workplace, fitness for duty. I'll cover some things related to traditional drug testing methods and how it probably maybe be a little bit more review for those of you that follow drug testing and know it well, but kind of tie that to windows of detection, how they work and what they don't do in some cases, through some pros and cons discussions. Then we'll gain a better understanding of the impairment technology from Ken, and he's going to even talk about a couple of case studies, things that are starting to you know, happen in the field with this technology, and be able to cite some actual cases for us. So I think that's really pretty cool. All right, so just to kind of tee up a couple of slides here relative to the magnitude of the drug problem today, or the you know, workplace safety, if you will, problem. And it's not only about marijuana, but we do tend to focus on that in a couple of slides here. So you know, we look at the Quest Diagnostics Index from from a few years ago. This is the most current information. We'll get more updated info this year as the Quest Diagnostics Index comes out in 2025. But from the last one, it showed a positive drug test increase in the general workforce of 4.7% from 2022 to 2023. And further, the over a 5-year period, marijuana positivity increased 45%, with 2023 reaching an all-time new high, which is obviously concerning. More concerning, perhaps, is that when you look at the time frame between 2015 and 2023, post-accident, marijuana-related positive drug tests increased 114%. That's really significant, and just cause for concern. When we did the current consulting group survey in 2024, 59% of the participants believe that decisions made to discontinue marijuana testing, which unfortunately is a trend. It's not a huge trend right now, but it is something we're tracking and we're following, has encouraged employees to consume marijuana before work. So a much smaller percentage said that it did not. That's not super surprising, but it is daunting when you think about that being 60% of the participants in the survey feel like that's an issue. In another independent survey that looked at people using marijuana, and this was a bit more selective because it is in a state or states where marijuana is legal. 31% of those admitted to using marijuana while on their way to work. 48 admitted to using marijuana at work, which is a huge concern, whether that's during breaks or some other time during work. And remember, it sometimes is concealed. So you think, how do people end up doing that? Through things like vape pens and other methods of using marijuana that you don't even necessarily see, including things like edibles. According to the American Addiction Center's 22%, 22.5% of the individuals admitted to being current drug users say they use during the workday marijuana, and 40% of the people who work from home full-time say they have gotten high before and during work hours. Obviously, a lot more convenient for them and easy to do while you're sitting in the comfort of your home. So the statistics, don't change a whole lot, but in case you haven't seen them, the amount of money involved in substance abuse in the workplace is huge. It's estimated that this number varies between 70 and 80%, depending upon which survey you look at, but somewhere around 70% of Americans who use illegal drugs, or even if they're using it legally now, if you want to call, the legal use of marijuana, that they're currently employed. So that cost that related to drug abuse in our workplaces is a cost of $81 billion, huge number. It's hard to get your head wrapped around that. And those tie into things like lost productivity. A big piece of it has to do with that productivity, absenteeism at work, or out of work, and things that are relating to your ability to not make the product you're supposed to be making. 25 billion tied into that. And then healthcare costs are another big piece, 25 billion related to the increase in healthcare costs from that. I haven't seen actual dollar numbers on workplace theft, but they're out there. I think if you dig hard enough, workplace theft is a huge issue. People like to support their habit by stealing things from their workplace. This happens a lot in the retail space. You can attest to this if you're in the retail market, or perhaps even if you're in construction or trades or one of those industries where things like tools and things that are easy to carry off of a job site are expensive, and they're going to walk off and get resold, and they're worth some money to these folks. So the cost of a drug abusing employee, 3.6 times more likely to be involved in an accident, 5 times more likely to file a workers' compensation claim, and the average cost of which some of those medically consulted injuries is about $39,000. Average cost of a workers' comp claim is 41, but if there's an incident or a motor vehicle where a motor vehicle crash is involved, it's much higher than that. It could be 78 or higher. But 78 is the number we saw in this particular data set that we gathered. So we're talking big numbers here when it comes to workers' comp and comp claims and incidents that occur. For practicality purposes, if you're trying to do some calculations in your program, this is one way to do it. It's not an exact science. There's going to be things you're going to want to look at in terms of the percentages of your workers that you think might be substance abusers and maybe the costs, but the average costs are depicted here. In this case, in this example, if you had a company that had 1,000 employees and about 15% of those workers were current substance users, that's about 150 current substance users on your payroll. And you can get that data. This is an average of 15%, but you can get that data by looking at through a good drug testing program and assessing, what are your positive rates. And if you don't have a program, then that's a problem. You're gonna have a hard time getting that. You're gonna have to look at incidents and accidents and all that sort of stuff. But if each of those cost an average of about $8,800 a year, then substance abuse is costing your company about $1.3 million a year. Pardon. So kind of one way to do those calculations. There's a couple of slides here that tie to incidents and accidents that have occurred, real world kind of stuff. This one goes back a ways, but it's a really good example of something that occurred actually not too far from me where I live here in Pennsylvania. 2026, this was a train that was moving along pretty fast down a track, and there was some folks doing some work with a backhoe on that track, and a couple of Amtrak workers were killed. There were a bunch of passengers on this train, many of which were injured, and there's some miscommunication apparently that took place between the people using the backhoe on the track trying to do some repairs or whatever they were doing, and the conductor, the engineers of the train. When said and done, they conducted testing on the engineers and on the workers that were working on the tracks, and they found, of course, some tie-in with marijuana positives, and some of the workers had been tested positive for cocaine and opiates. And so the amount of money on the line here was just out of the chute. It was $30 million for damages to the tracks and the trains, and there were still lawsuits, additional things going on that may even still be pending from this. So big, a big deal. This may be a little bit of a smaller example, but hits home when you think about something that you might be doing recreationally, not even anticipating the fact that someone could be, under the influence or impaired when you go out to have a nice little balloon ride. But this occurred in Albuquerque, New Mexico back in 2021. And this thing crashed into a power line, and the basket detached and fell to the ground. Of course, unfortunately, no one survived, including the pilot. And when the NTSB did their, follow-up, they concluded that there was drugs involved by the pilot. And the quote was, contributing to the accident was pilot's use of impairing illicit drugs. Some impairing effect of THC would likely have been present that would have affected the pilot's ability to successfully operate the balloon. So these kind of things happen. Some of them get publicized like this, and some of them don't, but they're out there. And you certainly don't want to be the owner of these kinds of that kind of a business. So more marijuana users means you're going to get more people using it, more people testing positive. And so as that continues to spread across the country, you're going to see more positive results increasing, which is going to give you some predictable increases in all the things that I just talked about when it comes to, whether it's workplace accidents, increased, workers' compensation claims, use of your healthcare benefits, and turnover, which means you have to hire more people more frequently, which is a costly thing to do. Your absenteeism, that ties to your productivity, not to mention things like the PR for your company, the bad PR that produces, and just the overall impact on a company's reputation. So it all leads to all bad stuff. So dropping marijuana testing from one's program is certainly not a good answer in today's environment, even though it seems to make sense from a hiring standpoint. There are other ways to deal with that, which we'll talk about in some of the following slides. Some of the connections between pre-employment screening and, for example, in accidents. In a 2022 report, customers that were facing these, challenges of getting people hired for some of their positions looked at pausing or discontinuing their pre-employment drug screening programs to get candidates hired faster. And this report showed that during the same period, nearly all the industries saw an increase in positive results from post-accident drug testing. So, in other words, if you drop pre-employment screening, which is meant to be a deterrent and meant to keep people, on their toes and not showing up to work high or impaired, if you drop that, then you're opening up the gates to them saying, okay, it'll be okay, I won't get caught. So that means you're going to hire more drug users. And that increase in post-accident positive results tells us that, that's going to have a negative impact on our workplace safety programs, and you can't allow that to happen. And then connection between pre-employment and marijuana drug-related accidents, which is tied to whether they had a pre-employment program or didn't. So when post-accident drug testing positivity for clients who do pre-employment drug screening is compared to those who do not, we saw that from that same study, performing pre-employment drug screening experienced a 17% increase in post-accident positive rates, which is not good. But compared to those that did not perform pre-employment drug screening, they saw a doubling of their post-accident rates from 2019 to 2020. And of course, that's a time period where we continue to see legalization of marijuana across the country. And so this is continuing as you look at the Quest Index and some of the more recent data. Post-accident rates are continuing to rise. So that's why we should continue to drug test. We shouldn't have to ask the question why continue, but we do, right? We have to challenge what's going on with marijuana legalization, and we just going to find more industrial accidents, more injuries, more absenteeism. The report from the National Safety Council specifies that cannabis impacts psychomotor skills and cognitive ability, and there is no level of cannabis use that's safe or acceptable in these safety sensitive positions. And there just really isn't. And when you think about kind of the marijuana today that's out there, it's not 3 or 4% weed that was from yesteryear. This marijuana is much stronger, probably on the average today in the 20% range. I think I saw some data the other day that suggested the average marijuana is somewhere between 20 and 25% today, which is 4, 5, 6 times higher than what it used to be. And and you have just such concealing ways to use it when you look at these vape pens and edibles and things of that nature. Another report that Ken showed me yesterday said that more Americans use cannabis daily now than alcohol. And that's all new. I mean, it used to be alcohol was always number one in terms of things that could potentially have an impact on fitness for duty or something that could be impairing in the workplace. Cannabis is now taking the lead. So I'm going to talk about traditional drug testing here for a little bit, and just prior to Ken coming on and talking about gaze, maybe some of this will be a little bit of a refresher, but I think there's some stuff in here that will help to show the value of drug testing methods, some of the differences, but also how the gaze technology plays into this. So when you're looking at drug testing methods, of course, there's lab-based, and then there's point of collection tests, which would be rapid formats, right? You're looking for things that would give you flexibility You're looking at different panels today, and people should be looking at their panels and pulling out things that don't belong in there anymore, like methaqualone and propoxyphene, and adding things that are more valuable. Of course, always paying attention to your policies. If you have that listed in your policies, it's important to update those if you're going to start changing around your program. But you're looking for accuracy. You need to look at those state laws and regulatory aspects as you're picking a method. Is it FDA cleared? Is that important to your program for what you're going to be doing? What labs are you going to use? Did the window of detection for the test, does it tie to what you're doing in your program? The reason that you're testing, is it, do you want a short window? Do you want a medium? Do you want a longer window of detection? And then assessment of impairment. Is it possible for you to do that? And I think you'll hear today that it is. And the marijuana form we have to be thinking about today, because there's new language coming out in some laws, like in some states like California and Washington. We're learning about things called psychoactive form of drug and non-psychoactive or metabolite, right? And so the form of marijuana is becoming important when you're looking at a method. And then overall, your cost effectiveness and the ROI of the methodology is important. Sample types, of course, of traditional urine, there's hair, there's blood, which traditionally is not done in workplace testing, but oral fluid is really coming into its own. And then you look at things like instant versus lab-based, and you know, that gives you a lot of opportunity and methods to choose from. But when you look at the most common 3 methods right now of screening that are out there, you're really looking at urine, oral fluid, and hair for employment screening. And with those 3, today there's actually an option for doing both lab and rapid on all 3. And before last year, we wouldn't have said there was a rapid option for hair, but now there actually is. And there's a method out there from that's recently released last year from a company called Wanfo that has a rapid hair test. And a company, a laboratory called Omega is actually reselling that out there for them in addition to themselves. So that is an option. And of course, there are rapid and lab tests for urine and oral fluid. They're all scientifically valid. You know, there's some question about hair in the past and some biases that have been talked about, but by and large, when you really look at it across the board, then the use of hair testing, it's certainly scientifically accepted and you know, proposed. If you look at the bottom there, SAMHSA regs are in place for urine and oral fluid, but they're proposed for hair, and I'm betting that at some point they will be federally accepted and part of DOT screening as well. The windows of detection are very different. So if you're looking for something that's, you know, short term, long term, you have to pay attention to this, because the ability to detect drugs in urine is a little longer term. Call it intermediate, something that's, you know, days. The issue being that you're really looking at more past use, whereas oral fluid, you're looking at pretty much immediately after someone uses, to about a day or maybe 2 days, depending on the drug. With hair testing, there's a lag time. You're really looking out further, like 90 days, 120 days. You're looking at months, you know, weeks to months. So you're really looking more at lifestyle and those that indicator, as opposed to what did they do this morning when they came into work. And so that presents different values to you depending upon what the goal is of your program. It could be, you know, medium, low, or high, depending upon what the goal is of your program. Detection of parent THC, which is about, you know, again, tying to recent use, knowing that someone's got it in their system now. Urine is looking at the past. And so no, it's not detecting parent. Oral fluid does, and hair does not. Legal in all 50 states, of course, with urine, and oral fluid almost there. There's a couple of states that don't necessarily permit it. Most states for hair. And of course, with rapid tests, you have to be careful. There are some states that just don't allow rapid tests or have restrictions on rapid point of collection tests. And, you know, those are part of state laws that you just have to look at and be aware of, and certainly things that Current Consulting Group does as part of our services that we offer. I just threw this slide in here because of the importance of this whole psychoactive drug versus metabolite thing that's becoming more and more important. Just so you know, the type of THC or marijuana, there's two types that we measure through these drug tests. There's the metabolite, THC, COOH, which is basically the carboxylic acid form of it. That's what you get that ends up in urine. So that's metabolized and ends up in the urine or hair sample. Once it goes through the body and gets processed. That's also the non-psychoactive form of the drug. So it's going to tell you past use, not what someone's got in their system now. Whereas the parent THC or Delta-9, the psychoactive form, is what you find when you test oral fluid, or if you're doing a breath test, or as you'll learn with the gaze test, you're really looking at something that's really in their system now. So these are, this is important in the state of California, and Washington, which if you don't know and you're in one of those states, you need to know. We were just at a conference last week and had a fellow from California come up to us and said, that they were still doing urine screening and they weren't aware of this, but in the state of California, you can't use urine screening for your existing, pre-employment or employee hire testing purposes. You have to use a test that picks up the psychoactive form of the drug. And in Washington for pre-employment screening, it's the same thing. There are some carve-outs and some exceptions in certain areas, so it's not across the board, but you need to be aware of that in those states. Just sort of touching on this so that you get a feel for the importance of the windows of detection. And these are kind of busy charts, but just for a moment, if you look at the top left corner, this is depicting what the windows of detection look like for things like breath, which is very quick. If you breathe into one of these devices that are coming out, they're still kind of introductory phase, and none of them are widely commercially available yet, but sort of coming into their own. And I think there's a lot to potentially be gained from this type of test, but it's really for THC. You breathe into the device and you can detect that potential that parent THC very quickly over a 2 to 3 hour period, and then it goes away. So, but you're only going to find someone in that window, which is important to detect if you suspect somebody just walked into work, smells like marijuana, could be an issue. You'll see that with the gaze test as well. Whereas with oral fluid, that's immediately after use, but that lasts a little longer. So you're looking at hours to perhaps as long as a day of detection. Urine is even longer. You're looking at days to even as far as maybe a week or two. And then hair goes out much longer, as I had mentioned before. And so we're showing this to give you an idea of where the potential is to be able to assess the impairment. And so when you look at the right side, breath is where impairment can go out as long as 10 hours. With certain studies, as you'll see, breath is a little bit short for that. Oral fluid covers that window really well, or urine is not good enough because it's not picking up very recent use. So that these are just some indications of what sample type might be best if you're really looking for that and you need to use a screen, perhaps after something like the gaze test, which will come up here in a second. So that window of impairment is important because it helps you look at the drug testing method that might be best suited for your needs, to understand when the positive drug test can correlate with that window of impairment for a specific drug. Again, it's not just all about marijuana. Other drugs have impairing effects. Other drugs can be combined with marijuana. Alcohol and other drugs combined all have impairing effects. So, these are all important aspects. And then figuring out where recent use is in your program and how you're going to use it. So as I mentioned, it's not just about the, cannabis. The idea of being under the influence or impaired applies to some of those other areas I was talking about, whether it's prescription drugs, other combinations, sleep deprivation. Sometimes it's nothing to do with the drug. Someone just was up too late, didn't get enough sleep, up with the baby, or who knows what. It's a fitness for duty issue, and these are things that can be assessed through the gaze technology, which you'll see here in a second. And it's important for managers and supervisors to stay up on the signs and symptoms. There's training that's available for these sort of things, and Current Consulting Group has that on our portals. If you don't know signs and symptoms, and you're a supervisor and you're charged with being responsible for people on the floor of your warehouse or wherever you might be, then you need to get trained on those things, because they're part of you performing your duties to maintain a safe and effective workplace. It's not rocket science, but you got to go through it. It's quite interesting, really, when you learn about some of these signs and symptoms and how they tie to behaviors, and it's important, because if you're putting together a story about how someone potentially was positive or potentially impaired as language starts to come out with certain states, you have to build a case, you have to build a story, right? And if you know the signs and symptoms, you observe those, you documented those, you have a positive abnormal test with something like the gaze test, you combine that with a screen, a traditional screen, and that came up positive and confirmed by a lab, you got a tight story. But if you don't know the common signs, you haven't documented them, you're not trained on them, and you got pieces, then your company's going to be in a little bit more difficult situation to put that story together and for it to hold up for you. Should it go as far as court or a challenge of that nature. So I'm going to mute myself, move to the next slide for Ken, because he's going to talk about the impairment technology, and then we'll come back and I think we got some polls, and then we'll do some Q&A. So Ken, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. Doesn't seem that I have control of the slides, though. There we go. Okay. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Ken Fickler here, founder and CEO of Gaze, and we've heard a lot about traditional chemical drug tests today. And what I want to stress about those is that under no circumstances are they tests for impairment. There are certain windows in which they can align with impairment, but you can't ever be certain that what you're seeing from a drug test is predictive of impairment, because that's just not how drugs work in the body. They bind to certain receptors in the brain, and so when you have a positive drug test, that tells you someone used the drug previously, so at some point within that detection window, but it doesn't tell you if they're currently experiencing impairment. What our technology does is it fills that gap. It tells you if someone is experiencing impairment in the moment. And so what we've done basically with Gaze is we've created an automated eye movement test based on the drug recognition expert tests that have been used by law enforcement for about 45 years. The reason that we chose these tests is they have such a long history of use, a lot of corroborating science. They're very well understood by courts. And so we thought those were the best tests that we could utilize in our product to make a highly defensible test for impairment. The test takes about 6 minutes or so to run, and the test itself takes about 5.5 minutes, and then there's a little bit of time in processing. And so in the course of 6 minutes, you have a determination if someone is showing signs of impairment as they would be detected by a law enforcement drug recognition expert. And so today our product, of course, can detect impairment from cannabis. That's really the problem that we launched the product to solve. But we've also expanded that to be able to detect signs of impairment from every other class of drug. And so those include alcohol and other depressant drugs, opiates, stimulants, dissociative anesthetics, and most psychedelics. We're still working our way through capturing data for psychedelics. It's a very challenging task, but at least most of the psychedelics we can detect impairment from. So what you see on screen here really is the 3 parts of our system. They all work in tandem. On the right-hand side is the VR headset. That's where our tests actually get conducted. So you fit that to a test subject, you pair it using the mobile app, and then you can hit the start test button, and from there, everything's automatic. The VR headset provides a really ideal environment for us to be able to conduct these tests. We can completely eliminate background distractions. We can control the amount of light that's entering the eyes, and we can control how the stimulus on screen moves with mathematical perfection. And so these tests are performed exactly as they're supposed to be. And so what that means is that you get a very defensible determination of what's going on in someone's body at that particular moment. And that, of course, is also backed by test video, which is a really important piece of our defensibility. That's human interpretable. That's something that a human can look at and say, yeah, here we see signs of impairment. And so that's a really important aspect of our technology. In the middle, our mobile app allows the test administrator to start a test, follow along as the test is conducted, and then receive results at the end in real time. And on the left-hand side is our web app, and that's where all the test data gets housed. All of our test data gets pushed up to our cloud server, and that allows it to be stored very securely, as well as accessed by anyone in your company with appropriate permissions. So as an example, an HR person can log in, view the test analysis, download test video if needed, and really make defensible employment decisions based on that information. This slide is an example of some of the data that we get out of the product. And this test in particular is called horizontal gaze nystagmus. This is the test that most people are familiar with. When the law enforcement officer is doing the track my finger thing on the side of the road, this is the test that they're conducting. And so what we're looking for in this test is a very characteristic eye movement called nystagmus, and you can see it in the data. If you look at the peaks and valleys of these charts, we see relatively smooth peaks and valleys on the sober chart and relatively jagged ones on the impaired chart. And this waveform that you see is called nystagmus. And so our system is basically picking up on this indicator. We have 6 total tests that we run, and we're analyzing both gaze vector, so that's the direction that the eyes are looking, and pupil size, both of those at a very, very high level precision. Gaze vector gets analyzed to 13 decimal places of radian accuracy, and pupil size is analyzed to 1/100th of a millimeter, both at 90 hertz, so 90 times per second per eye, we take these measurements. And that, of course, gives us a huge amount of data that we can then analyze to look for these signs of impairment. The product is used today by a broad variety of safety-sensitive workplaces, including some of the largest and most prominent safety-sensitive workplaces in the United States. Our top industries are construction, manufacturing, oil and gas, logistics, but really, any safety-sensitive industry could utilize this technology. We are, of course, not a DOT test. The DOT has not determined that this is a test that they have adopted so far. We hope to get there someday, but they're still working on oral fluids, so they're a little ways behind. The technology is portable. You don't need to have a tethered computer or anything else to conduct a test. So you can go to the scene of an accident and conduct a test. It's non-invasive. We're not capturing any body fluids or blood or anything like that. And it's 50 state legal. So we have recently completed an analysis by our law firm to look at all the laws of the United States and make sure that we're in compliance with everything. We are. That includes biometric information privacy laws, drug testing laws, HIPAA, every privacy law in the country. All that stuff has been analyzed, and we are in compliance with everything. So it's really important to understand how gaze can be utilized within your workplace. And typically, gaze is the first line of defense when you suspect someone could be experiencing impairment, or if you want to do a random screening. Gaze is always paired with a chemical drug test, and we do that because we think that creates a really unimpeachable body of evidence that can be utilized to make very informed employment decisions. The other reason that we think that that's appropriate is gaze is, of course, brand new technology. We want to have our customers have a high level of certainty when they do make an employment decision, and so that shouldn't be based just on an impairment test. The testing technology is extremely cost effective. We have it priced in a way that is cheaper than anybody's existing drug testing program, and the idea here really is that you can supplant a portion of your drug testing, of your traditional chemical testing, using gaze tests. So rather than rely on doing drug tests for all your workforce, you can do a lot of gaze tests and save yourself a lot of money and a lot of time, and then only do chemical tests on those that would be positive. So when you're analyzing suspected impairment and you want to find out if drug use could be a factor, there are a lot of confounding issues that Brian mentioned, fatigue being one. You want to make sure that that person, isn't just experiencing some medical challenge or acute fatigue. And so what I wanted to sort of note with this slide is that it's always important to have a discussion and understand why someone could be experiencing something. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need a test. That just means that you as the employer need to understand what's going on with your employee. And so an interview is an appropriate first step. Gaze as the first line of defense would then be followed typically with a rapid oral fluid test. And we always recommend that our customers use a lab confirmable test. And so not all rapid tests are lab confirmable, but some are. And so we suggest that those be used in order to get the best understanding and the highest level of defensibility. One thing I also wanted to note is that Gaze can detect substances that are above and beyond what are included in traditional drug panels. And so a good example might be certain synthetic cannabinoids would not be detectable by a traditional delta-9 THC test. And so our technology can actually start to direct you into which of the confirmatory tests you want to do. So as an example, if you found opioid impairment, you wouldn't want to do a traditional 10 or 12 panel drug test that does not include fentanyl, and would in fact want to do a whole opioid panel, which would include fentanyl, and then give you the highest probability of detecting what substance someone is actually on. Oral fluid testing is, really, I think, rising rapidly and supplanting urinalysis as the preferred method for chemical drug testing. And that includes, one of the real reasons for that is that it's compliant with some new laws in California and Washington, and there's some other laws that we're tracking throughout the country that are going to replicate those, we think. And so oral fluid is really, has a shorter detection window and is looking for the parent drug, which is useful, but you really have to be cognizant of the limited number of substances that you're looking for on a chemical test, and make sure that you're looking for the appropriate things. All right, so a couple sort of case studies from our customers. There we go. All right, so I mentioned that our technology is utilized today by some of the largest safety-sensitive workplaces in the United States, and we're very, very proud of that. So one example is a leading steel manufacturer. They've got about 35,000 employees, and their rationale for adopting Gaze was that they needed to find a way to employ cannabis-using employees. They work in states where cannabis is legal, and that's a real challenge. So they need to fill the gap between understanding, if someone is experiencing impairment acutely or if they just used it responsibly last night. And so in order to do that, in order to safely and responsibly employ these people and maintain a safe work environment, they need an impairment test. And so we provide that. And the outcomes have been really positive for all of our customers. And this one in particular has had a really dramatic reduction in reasonable suspicion incidents and very strong employee retention. Their employees are super happy to have a way to not be penalized at work for safely and responsibly using a legal substance. And a lot of employers are facing similar challenges and want to find a way to employ these people. Brian mentioned earlier too that there's about 20% of the population that uses cannabis on at least an annual basis. And so the reality is we have to employ cannabis using employees. That's just part of the reality of operating a business. And so finding a way to do that safely is absolutely critical. Next up, one of the leading construction companies in the United States with about 5,000 employees, their purchase decision was really driven by the legislation that's coming out of California, specifically California AB 2188, and their employees' desire to utilize cannabis safely. The other reality is that the demographics of construction in particular, but other blue-collar industries, is that a higher percentage of those employees are utilizing cannabis than even the sort of general population. So again, employing these people and making sure that you can maintain a safe work environment is critical, and Gaze enables that. So being able to test in the moment, find out if someone is experiencing impairment, and not penalize someone for safely and responsibly using is really important. And so they have been able to do that to deter workplace impairment and reduce their incidence overall. All right, so I'll turn it back over to Jessica for a couple polls here.
Great, thank you so much for that information. We appreciate you all being with us on the call today. We're going to do just a couple polls here as we go into our Q&A section next. So we really appreciate your participation on these. The first poll question is your organization considering implementing impairment detection technology within the next year? And so I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll for us so that you guys can participate with us. So go ahead and share with us your response. Yes, we are actively exploring options. Maybe. We are interested but need more information. No, we have no plans to implement it. Not sure. I'm unsure of our organization's stance. No wrong answers here. We just want to kind of see where you all are with this. So we appreciate your time and participation. We'll just give you another couple seconds. And it looks like we're slowing down. So I'll go ahead and close that poll and share with everyone the results of it. So it looks like 4% said yes, we are actively exploring options. 46% said maybe, we're interested but need to know more. 18% no, we have no plans to implement it, and 32% are unsure of their organization's stance, which is really helpful information. So I'm going to hide these. And as we mentioned, we have two polls. So our second poll asks, what concerns, if any, does your organization have about adopting impairment detection technology? And so we'll throw that one up there for you. And what we're asking here is if there could be more than one concern, but let's just go with your leading concern. So privacy concerns, legal and compliance risks, accuracy and reliability, cost and implementation, or there are no concerns. And while you're participating in this poll, I just also wanted to make sure that everyone's reminded that we are going to share the recording of this event with you via email. We'll send a link so you can watch this again or share it with your colleagues, this information, review the slides. We are not going to hand out the actual slides in a PDF or something like that, but you will be able to review the information with the slides that are in the recording. So if anyone was curious about what the recording looks like, it's us talking just like you're seeing right now. All right, so we're slowing down with this poll. I'm going to go ahead and get those responses ready to share. And it looks like 4% look at privacy as a concern. 46% said legal and compliance risk. 27% said accuracy and reliability. 54% is cost and implementation. And there are some of you, 8%, with no concerns. So we're going to go ahead and hide that for now. And we are going to move forward. We appreciate your participation, of course. That's really helpful information for us. And we're going to go ahead to the next slide. The next slide takes us into our questions section. So if you have questions for Ken or Brian today, now would be a good time for you to put those questions into the questions section. There's a little tab on your on your dashboard where you can enter in questions. So if you have some, we're going to go through a few questions that we have already submitted to us, and then after that we'll include any other questions that come in. So one of the questions that we wanted to go back and review, and this is initially for Ken. Ken, can you cheat a gaze impairment detection with impairment detection technology like this?
Great question, and the answer is no. We have both compliance monitoring built into the test so that if someone is trying to cheat, that comes up proactively. And so we're looking at things like, are they holding their eyes closed? Are they blinking really rapidly? Are they not following the test instructions? All that's detected in real time. And then on the other hand, these tests were designed to be really predictive of what's going on in the brain. The eyes are, of course, directly connected to the brain, and this is why law enforcement utilize these tests. It's not something you can train yourself to get better at, and these are universal indicators that are present if someone is experiencing impairment. So that's really what we're looking for, just like law enforcement. And so no, you can't really cheat these tests. Okay,
wonderful information. That's helpful to know because there's been some studies that have come out in the last year that talk more about some of those situations. So another question though that if you're someone who is interested, you fall into the category of the people who mentioned that they're interested or they'd like to know more. A question that we'd like to know more about is what level of expertise is required to use Gaze?
There's a short training that we put all of our test administrators through, and then we issue a credential at the end of that. So all of our test administrators are credentialed. That's traceable back to the individual, traceable back to the training session as well. And so that's the limitation, though. There's not, sort of specialized training above and beyond that. It's a 1-hour training session that's required to conduct a test. We also have fail-safe built into the product, so there's not, ways that the product can sort of fail if someone doesn't do it right or whatever. It's very simple to use.
Okay, that's very helpful information. We have a question that came in about what if someone has an eye disorder like lazy eye? And I think that kind of goes into what are some other complications that might prohibit or could affect the test, or do they affect the test, really?
Yeah, great question. There's always, a couple of medical conditions that can cause, false or inaccurate readings on this test. And so we have a list of those included on a laminated card with the product, and that's designed to be read aloud to the test participant before they start the test. There's a limited number of things, and there are things like uncorrected lazy eye, blindness, prosthetic eye, kind of advanced neurodegenerative diseases, things like that can cause someone to not be a good fit for the test. But otherwise, it's very generalizable, and so virtually everyone can go through it.
Wonderful. That's great information. I know you talked a little bit about this between you and Brian's parts. We talked a little bit about this, but if you could just go through it with, is Gaze a replacement for chemical drug testing?
No, Gaze augments chemical drug testing. And so really the highest and best use of Gaze is to be used before a chemical drug test. So if you suspect there could be impairment, you want to do a random screening, you had an incident, something like that, Gaze is a great fit to be the first test that you conduct. And the reason, again, for that is that we can really save a lot of time and money on the traditional drug testing side. So let's say, as an example, and this is one of my favorite things that has happened with our customers, is they'll have a minor safety incident with no injury, but there's still a drug test required. We can go through and we can do an impairment test. We can find out in under 10 minutes if that person is showing signs of impairment. And if not, we can get them back to work. And that saves that company, hours of time getting that person to and from a clinic. It saves them the cost of the drug test. It saves them the cost of that person's wages as they're out waiting for the results. And so in a single incident, we can save a company thousands of dollars and make sure that person is back at work and able to be productive.
Excellent. I'm sure that's very important information for people who are considering and looking for more information. We'll turn the time over to Brian for a quick minute. I know Brian had a question or two that he wanted to ask as well. So I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone for a minute and let Brian come back on.
I was just thinking, Ken, sort of about the implementation phase and, thinking about it from a practical standpoint as to how a company goes about, maybe give an example of how is at the beginning stage, companies I'm sure are interested in figuring out, is this going to work for them? How do they go about testing it? Do you have like a pilot program? Do you have, and how does one get started doing this? Maybe just a minute or two, because we have a couple of minutes when then we need to wrap up, but I thought it might be useful for the audience to hear a little bit more about how does somebody get started, and is there a pilot phase, and what would that look like?
Yeah, a lot of our customers start in sort of a pilot phase. They'll choose, 1 or 2 problematic locations, and they'll deploy Gaze into those locations and see how it works. That happens all the time. We are constantly setting those up, monitoring those, working with our customers to ensure success in those. And then the idea is really that those would get, that the Gaze would get rolled out to the rest of the company upon success. And so, implementation ends up being, it sounds a lot more complicated than it is, I think. We have sample policy language that can be dropped into existing drug-free workplace policies. We have a law firm partner that provides an hour of free consultation to every one of our customers. We've got other consultants that we can draw on as needed to design policy if custom policy is required. But really, it's adopting that new policy, getting the system, getting your test administrators trained up, and then you're off to the races. And GAZE really, tends to prove its value very quickly. Typically, within the first couple months, companies can see positive ROI. They can understand how this gets utilized. Their employees can start to understand what it's doing and why, and how it's actually advantageous to them. So that's kind of how that looks.
Excellent. That sounds good. And I think as I was spent a lot of years in the implementing oral fluid drug tests and selling those when I was with OraSure and getting them up and running. There's nothing like a good pilot for showing people how things can work and how they perform in their hands. And so, I guess just in wrapping up, if someone is interested in this and taking a look at it, they contact you directly through the website or through these phone numbers here that are on the screen?
Yeah, all those are good methods. My email direct to me is ken@gaze.ai, ken@gaize.ai. I'm always happy to chat directly with people. If you want to set up a demo, we're happy to do that too. We do those all day, every day.
Good. Will you be at the NDASA meeting coming up in April?
I will. Our booth number is 306, so we're kind of dead in the middle, and we'll have the product, of course, on hand. People can come by for a personal demo there. We'll also be speaking on a panel, which I believe is the 3rd, April 3rd, from 10:30 to 11:30.
Great. All right, excellent. Any other questions, Jessica? Or are we good now?
No, I'm wrapping up. I've gone through my questions. Unless you guys have anything else you'd like to share with us today, I think we're good.
Just a sincere thank you to everyone for attending, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you both, Brian and Ken, for this information. And as Brian had helped me mention, there is contact information. Ken and Brian gave us information on how you can access GAZE. You can also get a hold of Current Consulting Group if you have any other types of questions regarding to your drug testing program, and how you can learn more about traditional drug testing and impairment drug testing. We want to make sure that those questions are answered, so either by us or by Ken. As I mentioned before, this presentation did qualify for continuing education credits from SHRM and from HRCI, and so we will send that information out. You don't actually have to do anything except for have attended, and we will give you that information via email. And with that, that concludes our webinar presentation today. We thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.